To stand out from the crowd, you need to step back every once in a while and reassess your expectations. Now, what do we know about expectations? Well, we know that expectations are pretty much how we think our lives are going to go, or how we want them to go, right? What we expect out of life. That's expectation. What's the difference between expectations and reality? Reality is kind of how life goes, isn't it? And sometimes, have you noticed that expectations, what we expect and what we get, are two different things? I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. In fact, let me ask you this. How many of you have ever, in your cars, you use one of these auto shades that fits in the windshield? How many of y'all use these? Those of you who raised your hands, have you ever read the directions that come on an auto shade? Well, I bore pretty easily, so I was at a red light one day and was waiting for the light to change, and so I picked this up on the front seat, and I flipped it open. I thought, well, let me just see if I'm doing this right. And I was doing fine until I got down here, and it's written in big red letters, warning, do not drive with auto shade in place. Remove from windshield before starting ignition. Now, I remember thinking to myself, I knew that. So some of the things we're talking about today, I mean, I know you know these things. I hope you know these things. If you walk out of this room and think to yourself, wow, everything Jean talked about today, I had never even considered any of that. None of that had ever crossed my mind. I'm kind of curious to know what you're doing here and who's paying who's paying whatever you charge, because, wow, you got a lot of work to do. So I'm trying to get you to thinking in terms of looking at things in new ways, looking at possibilities in more creative ways, so you can get to the place you want to be and earn that seat at the table. So, what do we know about expectations? We know that expectations determine everything we do in life. We know two things about expectations. How close your expectations come, how close life comes to meeting your expectations, plays a huge part in your levels of satisfaction and happiness and success. The other thing we know about expectations is this. Other people's expectations of you play a very large part in how you are perceived, and determine in a large part whether they want to work with you, work for you, communicate with you, buy from you, do business with you, all of the things that go into making up a successful business relationship. People have expectations. So the big question then becomes, how do you not only meet expectations, but exceed expectations? Because if you're going to stand out from the crowd and get a seat at the table and be considered a strategic partner, if you're going to remain employable and marketable for as long as you choose to have a career, you need to figure out what you need to do to exceed expectations. Now, some of you are in business for yourself, and so you might be the only person who's doing all the work. Some of you are in organizations that have gone through a downsizing or a restructuring, and so 3 of you are doing the work of 4 people in your department. Some of you are thinking, whoa, I'd give anything to have 4 people in my department. Wouldn't that be great? So you might be thinking, well, how am I expected to exceed expectations if I'm just barely managing to keep up and do everything that I've got to do? It's not really a choice. Exceeding expectations is not really a choice. But there are 6 areas that you need to be aware of if you're going to learn how to exceed expectations and continue to do so. And we've only got time this morning to look at 2 of them. So these are the 2 I focused on, because these 2 are very important in establishing how you are perceived by the people who do business with you. These 2 right here. The first one is to be a confident communicator. Now, I know with what you do, I know you're in sales. Everybody in this room is in sales. But what I'm trying to help corporate clients around the country understand is that no matter who you are, where you work, what you do, and what your job title is, you're in sales. Everybody in every organization today is in sales. Being able to sell yourself, your ideas, your passion for your organization, your your commitment to positive growth, all of that involves selling. And you'll never be able to sell well if you're not a good communicator. There are many, many ways we need to communicate. We all understand that. But when we think about change, think about how communication has changed in the last few years and how hard it is to keep up with all those changes. I remember years ago being at a conference with other professional speakers, and one guy at our table said, well, if you don't have a website pretty soon, if you don't have a website in the next year, you're going to be out of business. Meeting planners, they want websites. They want to be able to, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't need a website. I got a telephone. I mean, they can pick up the phone and call me. I've got stamps. I can send letters to people. Well, how long did that last before all that changed? And look at all the changes that have come about in just the last few years. Let me ask you a question. How many of you are involved in social media for business purposes? Facebook or LinkedIn? How many of you are on Facebook? Raise your hand. How many on LinkedIn? Raise your hand. I was talking to a woman at the last conference, and she said, I was on Facebook for 2 weeks. It got on my nerves. There were people on my page that I didn't care anything about. And they were telling me about all the things that were going on in their lives and showing me pictures about their vacations. I didn't care anything about that. I lasted for 2 weeks, and then I figured that is a huge waste of my time. I'm off of Facebook. I met a young woman at a conference who had a little different point of view. She said, well, I've been married for 2 weeks, but now I'm officially married. And I said, well, what does that mean? And she said, I just updated my Facebook page. Now, I'm sharing those two opposite ends of the spectrum examples with you for this reason. How many of you in this room text? How many of you don't text, don't ever want to learn? Thank you very much. I'm way too busy to learn how to do that. Or you're probably not going to raise your hands, but I can see some of y'all kind of nodding your heads. Here's what you need to know. Well, first of all, when I started texting, my 3 grown children who never take my phone calls, when I text them, they answer me back. I mean, immediately. It doesn't matter if they're in a meeting. Sometimes I think, oh, you know, I shouldn't really bother Jennifer. She's in a meeting. Or when Michael was in college, oh, I shouldn't text Michael. He's probably in class. In a second, he's back to me, you know? So texting is important, not only if you want to stay in touch with your children, but here's the thing. I just gave you an example of a young woman who said now she's officially married because she updated her Facebook page. That young woman may eventually be one of your clients. The young generation of today, the generation of today who lives and breathes social media is going to be your client. If not today, then tomorrow. So you need to be able to communicate with people. If you're going to sell yourself and sell your ideas, you need to be able to communicate with your clients, your customers, your students, your patients, your guests, your members, however you define them. You need to be able to communicate with them in ways that they want to communicate. The second strategy I can give you is to be a lifelong learner. And those of you in this room today know what that means because you took time away from your busy schedule to come to this conference so that you could learn from the speakers, from each other, that you could share your knowledge, share your expertise. You've got to be a lifelong learner. It doesn't matter how long you've been on the job or how many initials come after your name. What matters is what you know and how you deliver what you know to the people who are paying you to do that.